talking about the fact that ever since the book of Genesis, you have the promises to Abraham that are given. And you have a centering in on not just the land promise or just the seed promise or the nation promise, but all three of them. And they play different parts. And as well as playing different parts, they go to reinforce one another as well. The land promise given to Abraham about the land from the river of Egypt, the Wadi el-Resh, the river of Egypt, to the great river, the river Euphrates, over to the Mediterranean, and then out here into the wilderness. That is something that is given to show exactly how much God intended to give to Israel of the land. That's what we're seeing come about now in the book of Joshua. Remember, back in Numbers 34, there were these cities that were given. And those cities along the red line that you have there marked the boundary of what it was that God said you'll be receiving of that land. They go up to the Euphrates River, down to the river of Egypt, the Wadi el-Resh, over to the land of the wilderness, and then to the Mediterranean Sea. You have those reaffirmed in the book of Ezekiel as being given again once they've gone away in captivity and they were going to come back, that they would have those borders that would be possible if they would be obedient to God. Of course, the fact is what? Were they ever obedient to God fully after the taking away in the captivity? No. So they never received that fully again. In Numbers, you have a statement there. The book of Numbers gets its name because you numbered the people, numbering them according to verses 1 and 2 of Numbers 1, in order to be a census of those who were of the age of warfare. Every male individual from 20 years old and above who's able to be in that warfare. Now, if you take that number and what you're counting is only males who are 20 and above who would be able to go to warfare, obviously you're not counting everybody. How many would that be comparatively to what you'd look at as a whole? And the typical, the typical point is you're not going to have but about 1 in 3, a third. In other words, the number that you have times 3 would be the number of people as a whole. That's the most conservative estimate, and I don't think there's any way you can really have that. 4 to 5 is given as a typical, and I don't see how you're going to get under 5 with regard to the number of children you had and everything else that were looked at during that time. You multiply these numbers by 4, you're going to have the total number of people that are there. Well, when you take that census, Reuben had 46,500 of the men, so multiply that by whatever it is that you want. Simeon, 59,300. Gad, 45,650. Judah, 74,600. Issachar, 54,400. Zebulun, 57,400. Ephraim, 40,500. And Manasseh, 32,200. What's significant about these two? Those are the half-tribes, the tribe of Joseph. So to be on an equality there, you'd have to put those two together if you're going to look at it as those of the descendants there of Joseph. Okay, then you have Benjamin, the 35,400, and Dan, when you start looking at that, what's going to be obvious about what you need with regard to Judah, for instance? You're going to have more of a land that's habitable. Maybe less than what some others have in area, but more of it is a habitable area. Maybe the cities that are given, so forth, that you're going to have taking place there. Typically, that's what you're going to notice is with those greater numbers, you're going to have greater cities, greater areas of what would be habitable land from there. All right, we started talking about this last time. When you look at the tribal allotments of Canaan, it had been set out in this kind of a fashion of typically where they were going to be, but what had not been given, the exact borders of all of that. So that's what we're getting into right now. These exact borders had been given. One.
They were given before they crossed.
Okay. That's Transjordan, or to the east of the Jordan. They had already, Sihon and Og and all of those they had gone to battle with. They had been through that whole area. And it was at that time that Moses gave them the cities of refuge on that side, because they knew which were the cities that would be best to flee to in that city of refuge. Now we're coming over, already have come over to Canaan proper, to the west of the Jordan. And that's where you're going to have these allotments that are given in some detail. Chapter 18, verses 1 through 6. The whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh. Now, when is this happening? How far are we into their coming into the land already for sure? Okay, we're at a minimum 5 years that's already been given, right? I'd say, yeah, 6 would be about the least you could say that is going to be. But you have this a while of them having already been over on the other side, on the west side of the Jordan. They've gone in to subdue the land. Now, with all of that being done, now what do you still got a problem with? Before I forget. You set up the tabernacle of meeting there. The land was subdued before them, but what still hadn't happened? All right, there remained 7 tribes which had not yet received their inheritance. Joshua said to them, "How long will you neglect to go and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers has given you? Pick out from among you 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them. They shall rise and go through the land, survey it according to the inheritance, and come back to me. And they shall divide it into 7 parts. Judah shall remain in their territory on the south, and the house of Joseph shall remain in their territory on the north. You shall therefore survey the land in 7 parts and bring survey here to me, that I may cast lots for you here before the Lord our God." Now, that's what the New King James says. Is anybody reading out of the King James or American Standard that notices something different a good bit in those verses? Moses says, according to those, the exact language that's given actually is, not Moses, Joshua says to them, you go and you draw out the land, you sketch it. When you take a survey of something, Curtis could get up and teach better than I could here on this, but when you take a survey of the land, what's the purpose? All right, you've got to find some boundaries. Now, that's one of the things. And in that, you have repeated statements, not only back in the law, but with regard to the statements from Proverbs and others,
that you find those boundaries by the markers, the ancient markers, or the ancient standard that was there. And they made these places, these standards, these kind of identifying things that would say, okay, this is where this whole thing begins from, this drawing. And they would stake out those borders in that sort of a way. After you've done that, what do you need to have that usable? Okay, you got to have a drawing out of that. Some ways in which you put that as the way it fits with everything else. You can know the borders of a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and it doesn't help you a bit to know the jigsaw puzzle if you don't put them together. That's what ultimately, when all of that fits together, that you see how all of this works. That's the point that's being made here. Moses is telling them, you go into the land. You know the land. You know the basic outline of where you're going. Now, you draw the boundaries inside of that. You draw those areas where it's going to be habitable in a kind of a cohesive way. And we'll figure out who it is that's going to be by you bringing that drawing back. And we're going to look at it. We're going to cast lots. And God's going to note through me, through the casting of lots, who gets what land. All right? That's simple enough, isn't it? That's how they're going to do it. Why hadn't they done that in over 6 years? Okay. But it says they were subdued. God's already done that and helped them get through with the enemy. To the extent they were going to take over, God had been fully cooperative with doing that and giving them everything. Not one thing failed, we're going to know later on. That's a lack of diligence. He said, why are you slack? In the American Standard, it uses that term. Why haven't you done what you needed to do? How long would you neglect to go? It was not a good thing. It spoke to them of the kind of fact that they were not as diligent as they should have been. So we have part of the land given, but certainly not all of it. Now what are we ready for? Chapter 18. What do you have in chapter 18? Do what? Okay, dividing the land to who here in 18? Benjamin. And have you ever noticed anything? This is the smallest piece of land. But in comparison to everything else being put out, how much do you have in wording of that versus everything else? There's more there than any of the rest of them. Why? Wonder why in the world that is. That's going to be that jigsaw piece in the middle, if you will. It's got the most little things, nooks and crannies, and all around. And so what you get in the book of Joshua is a laying out of exactly what the borders are, and it's going at a very small rate around there, calling the cities, the villages, everything else. And you're going through this area to try to lay out the land. Now, obviously, part of that land is at this time what's given there of Jearim, which is Jerusalem. That's within Benjamin's territory. But is it Benjamin's territory for the rest of the Old Testament time? Whose territory is it most of the time? Judah's. That you have there. Jericho, Bethel, Ai are all there within that place of Benjamin. So now you've got an area which is basically where they've been. And you're laying out that area in some minute detail. Okay, here's what Benjamin is going to have. Now, when you look back over there, I should have put this back in a minute ago. Benjamin has how many in comparison to the others? All right. The because there are not that many people, they have one of the least of the numbers in the census. But it's going to be almost all habitable land that is very important. And it's going to be between two main groups of the children of Israel. On the south side, who? Judah. On the north side, who? Okay, and Ephraim and Manasseh together, the children of Joseph, is what the scripture says there. That it's in between those. So you have that on this side. Ephraim would be here. Manasseh coming down along the side of Ephraim, beside the Jordan River there. Now, what does that mean we've got in chapter 19 then? Chapter 19, we've got the allotments for Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. Judah's already had theirs. They've been diligent. Caleb was very diligent in making sure that that land is cleared out. These three have some over here, but now you've got the 6 who had none. Manasseh's going to take some as well from that west side of the Jordan, but that's not a lot in there. That's just something that they come into in that way. Here's the 6 that we're going to be talking about. What do you notice about all of those? They're given in the order that you have there in chapter 19 of the allotments. What do you notice about it? What's the pattern of what it says about that? All right, they brought this, the pictures of it, or the drawing that's there of this place to Joshua, and there's the priest with him, and here are these men that have gone and done this kind of a survey. Now they come and they show it to Joshua, and what does Joshua do? In order to allot the land, what does he do? What's the method? All right, cast lots. The same way that there was that last time when we talked about with regard to how this comes about. That's the way in which God is working in this through his providence. It isn't something that we have a great deal of detail to, none at all. But lots were kind of like, if you will, stones or something that would be analogous to our use of dice, but the sense of it being that one stood for something with regard to a particular characteristic, a stone that had a kind of a way about it that would stand for someone, and they would do those kind of casting of the stone, and the way that it was put together gave them an answer. How? I don't have the slightest clue. But that's what took place. And that's how they allotted this. Everybody was around to see this process, which tells you what? Okay. You don't want something done in the back room, what's everybody going to say? Well, that wasn't fair. You cheated. You know, got this one there. That's not what happens. It's out there in a way where everybody can see this. So they've got that taking place. And now you've got all of these there. The last one of Dan is given. Now you notice Dan in their allotment of it, what's described is this area right here, down to the west of Benjamin and Ephraim. But what do we find in the last couple of verses there about the allotment of Dan? They went up to where?
up to Mount Hermon, at the base of that mountain, you would have some rising up, and that's where Dan would have their vineyards, their olive trees as well. On the slopes going up to Hermon, that's one of the very fertile areas there of the land at that time. What else do you notice about in chapters 18 and 19? The taking of this land and all of these cities that you have named. I don't care if you remember the names. That wasn't given so that we could memorize those, obviously. But what's important about them? There are some lessons you can learn from those names. What do you notice happens repeatedly with the names? They change them. Why? Okay. One was Kirjath Baal. That's Baal. Then they gave it another name. Wonder why? You're getting rid of that influence. That's one of the things that God was trying to get them to do. Same thing we talked about last time with regard to Caleb and taking the city of Kirjath Arba. And Arba was the great man of the giants, the Anakim. Now what's it going to be called? It'll be called something else. His name's taken away, and instead of his name, which is an Arabic kind of a name that is there, you have a Hebrew name. You have the same root at the first, but it's a Hebrew name that's given for the latter. And what does that tell you then? They're making this land that of the Hebrews. This is what God intended for them to do. This is a good part of what they were doing. Second thing you learn is, did they do that with all of the areas? No. There's the problem. Because with some of those areas, they didn't go in and take them. They kept or retained the name, and some of those names took on the name of their idols and so forth. And as a result of that, what's going to happen? Those idols stay in and they have their power. What does that tell you in principle? Is there a lesson there for us to learn?
Do what God says.
Do what?
Do what God says.
Okay.
Not to mix and mingle with it. Don't entertain it. It's just not even mentioned. To put it out.
How about our vocabulary? We need to change our vocabulary to adapt to the world. What happens when we do?
You don't stand out.
You hear the term sometimes of bywords or that which is of, you call those things? Yeah, euphemisms, but yeah, there's another one. It stands for, it sounds a lot like the curse word.
Acronym?
No. You know what I'm talking about. And instead of saying this one, you say this one, but everybody knows you meant this one. That's what it stood for. What does that do? That's an adaptation of us to the world. What we want to do is get a kind of a way in which we speak that is obvious, that it's different from that. When the people of God start sounding like Calvinists, and they start sounding like modernists, and they start sounding like atheists with regard to their vocabulary, watch out. Their teaching's not far behind. That's something I've noticed over and over again. Keep the verbiage of what you see in the Bible. Keep the verbiage of God's Word, what describes it. Don't say, well, I want to get as close to the world as I can, then they'll understand. No, they won't. They'll misunderstand you. That's what they'll do, because they're going to keep their thoughts from that. Go ahead. And then we have
More teaching, preaching with analogies and anecdotes and things like that instead of speaking as the oracles of God.
Right.
Is that what you're alluding to?
that as well.
Because I see that a lot. You'll have here's our source text for this
Right.
lesson. Here's this verse, and then you get 30 minutes of whatever.
Yeah.
And you don't have that purity of speaking like the oracles of God speaking.
There are some of those that I look at and I just have a wondering, why do you use that language? I remember when I was probably in my 20s, all of a sudden I started hearing people talking about my prayer life. And that hit me as strange. A lot of you are going to say, that's been used all my life or something there. But I hadn't heard that until I was in my 20s. I said, why don't we call it our Lord's Supper life? Or why don't we talk about our teaching life or our learning life? Or, what was the difference about that kind of a thing? And some of that, I think, had to do with the idea of you're not just praying when you're praying to God. Your everyday life is kind of like a prayer. And it put all that together. That's what much of the evangelical world was saying. And that's why their concept of asking for forgiveness in a specific way is really not there. Their concept is your life is a life of prayer. That's a wrong concept of prayer. And if that's the idea someone has, they're letting their thinking be determined somewhat by that of the Word. Now, others have used that terminology, I think, without any intent of doing that at all, and with a good idea involved of what is prayer and the place prayer has in our life, and that's what they mean by that. So I don't have a problem with that. But what we need to do is make sure that we're not accommodating or changing what's biblical and changing it into terms that are really more in the secular and denominational sense, because it will affect our thinking, our doctrine. Go ahead.
What would facilitate
Doug, remind me. I'm going to come to you next. Go ahead.
What would facilitate that too is some of these people, rather than driving them out and annihilating them, they put them in a tribute.
Right.
So there'd be a commingling of
Yeah.
of the language.
And in a sense, then, they're necessary because we're getting our money from them. And so they become the whole thing. Go ahead.
Well, I agree with you about vocabulary, but one thing to really bring it modern is putting off the old man. You don't want those idols, you don't want those old names.
Yeah.
Because how easy is that to come in? Oh, well, before I was a Christian, I did this. And, it's okay. No, put off the old man. Cut off the arm. Remove the eye.
Yeah.
And that's really what God wanted for the people.
Right.
But they didn't want to cut off the arm or
That's
remove
right.
the eye.
That's right. There's a lot to be learned in just these lists, like there are sometimes in the list of what you have of names. There are a number of lessons that can be learned. But when you look at this, I wanted to bring those out. So Dan now is going to be up here. Predominantly, that's where you're going to find the people of Dan as time goes on. And you go later in this period of Israelite history. Anything else there? Okay, 18, 19. How about the end of 19? After these allotments, these were the inheritances which Eleazar the priest, Joshua the son of Nun, the heads of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel, divided as an inheritance by lot in Shiloh before the Lord, at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So they made an end of dividing the country. Why was that important? Why was it important to make an end, complete that dividing? You still have all of that land taken in the sense of being able to totally occupy every bit of it. Nope. But you have it all allotted to be taken, and you know where you're going from there. When you have them taking that land, saying this is what's there, the people who are still in that area, does the word get out to them of, hey, our area has been allotted to so-and-so. Sure it does. Now they've seen everybody else defeated, killed, everything else. What are they going to tend to do at this time? Okay. You got some people who aren't. You know, you have all the people who were killed with the jawbone of a donkey by the one of the judges. I often wonder about how stupid that last guy was after he saw everybody else killed, that he came up there and was killed himself. But he had that kind of a pride that he thought he could overcome him. There are going to be people who stay behind and think they can overcome the people of God. But most of them are going to look at that and they're going to say, it's probably a good idea if we leave and we go somewhere else at this particular time. And that's what happens as you look at it in some of the cases that we see within the history. All right. Anything else there? Go ahead, Kurt.
So it mentions that right now, at least, the tabernacle, right? Or is this the tent of meeting? Was in
The tent of meeting is the tabernacle, yes.
Okay, in Shiloh?
Yes.
Is that where it stayed?
That's where it stays for a while. And then you'll have it as it's moved to Gilgal, and you have once at Shechem, but there is a moving of that. Remember, the law was when you get in the land and you have subdued all of the land within all of that border, and you have your areas that are at peace. Not just that you've subdued them, but they are at peace. That happens after the time of David. Then what was it time to do? God's law was you build a permanent house, a temple there, to replace the tent of the tabernacle. That was always the intent, for there to be a permanent place. But only after that point that God had showed them the full giving of everything that he intended, and they had a time of peace. Okay, go ahead.
The map we keep seeing, how many miles would you say north to south, east to west? I could have sworn I heard somebody say 12 miles a few lessons ago, and that doesn't sound right.
Not 12. There's a...
There you go.
Where is a... There's a... Somewhere along here. Well, I can't find it. Can anybody else? Have I missed a... Well, let me give you an approximate, okay? I'll go back to this one. From Kadesh Barnea, which is on the south side, that's well beyond Beersheba. That's down into the Negev, the south, the wilderness region. But from Kadesh Barnea all the way up to Dan at the north would have been no more than about, I think that's 35 miles, as I recall. East to west, as far as from the Mediterranean to the River Jordan, you're talking within the neighborhood of 15 to 20 miles, depending on where you are. Up here, a little bit closer to 15. If you're following the Jezreel Valley, which is along here and goes this way, I think that Jezreel Highway, I was looking at a sign.
Google says it was 140 miles by 40 miles.
By 40 miles? 140 miles?
That's what Wikipedia also Google says.
I don't think that's right. I'll check it out, but I'm pretty sure that you can go. There's a sign up that's on the Jezreel Valley, the Jezreel Highway to the Jordan. I think it's 20 kilometers from when you go from Mount Carmel over there to that area. Go ahead.
I was
that it makes a whole lot of difference, but I've seen in the maps, seems to be some different in the interpretation of where Manasseh is, the two half tribes or the two half pieces. In this one, it shows them side by side across the Jordan, and it just in one of your maps, it shows them completely disconnected. How is that? Does it make any difference at all? Well, not to us, of course, but.
Well, some of the times they're old maps from where they put some cities, as archaeology has found, some of where they thought the city was and where it is two different things. So some of that's there, I'm not sure. I haven't been real critical in looking at those, but just in kind of being proportional, I'll try to look at that a little bit more from now on.
If you go back to that other map that you had, it shows them completely disconnected.
Like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that would be saying that this is Transjordan. Probably they would have Manasseh going down there as well, or at least divided in that between that and Gad. At any rate, okay, here we go. Cities of refuge. Let's do this real quick. When you were over here on this side, they had already had those. Moses had given them why? Because they were already going through that area, right? And they knew which were the cities to flee to. Numbers talks about the idea of what happened. This is a city where you flee from the avenger. Who had the responsibility to avenge the one that was murdered in Old Testament law? All right, the family that was there had that. They had the responsibility. Why? I said, oh, that's vengeance. That's terrible. Why did God do that? He wanted to make sure that would have been done. What looks at it today, you don't have anybody that's particularly interested in that, who has a great interest in the person who was murdered and what has happened. You have them go on forever on death row or whatever, and you never have any expiration of this. But it's to be done with some immediacy. There's a threat that's beyond just a threat. They put in the express lane with the death penalty in Israel. So you have this, that the avenger, if it was not intentional, it was inadvertent, then they could flee to that city of refuge there. And so, in addition to these three, you had Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron. And those are all accessible to different parts of the land of Palestine. Anybody else got anything there? All right, that's chapter 20. Then 21, the Levitical cities. You had some discussion of Levitical cities over on the east side of the Jordan, but now all of them are laid out. This one here has both the cities of refuge, these red circles, plus the black dots. Those are all Levitical cities that you would see. The point was made with them that you have the Levites, you extend from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits all around. That was given for their area of their cattle. And then you'd have those 6 cities of refuge, as you said, and you have these 42 cities that are the cities that are there of the Levites. So you have them from different parts, in different groups of the tribes, and there they are as far as their place in which they existed throughout the area of Palestine. All right, anybody else got anything there? Anybody? That's the second line, I guess, wasn't it? Okay, so we don't have any more time to do the questions, but if you've got any questions on those, let me know. Did you find something about true and false, by the way? See anything on the true and false questions? Do what? Okay, they're all true. And that's the first for that one there, but they're all true, and then you have a little bit more mixing up on yes, no. Okay.